Bitcoin mining is probably one of the most misunderstood, misappreciated technologies that we have today that could help us do those things that that are at the top of the article. It can balance the grid, it can mitigate methane emissions, it can even help us build out electrical infrastructure, and it can help us solve some of the problems that are created by wind and solar. But it's a huge opportunity for our country to benefit from the technology. China has a backdoor into our energy systems. This is because 97% of the hardware comes from Chinese companies.
For
97% of the hardware for Bitcoin mining comes from predominantly two companies, and these are companies of Chinese origin. And
Can you kind of explain how this can help the SBR?
yeah, so what this bill does is it codifies the Bitcoin reserve, the strategic Bitcoin reserve that was established through executive order. If we as Americans want to see this legislation passed, we have to get Democratic support of the legislation and have them come in and be a co-sponsor. And that is something that we are spending a lot of our time advocating for and working on.
This episode is brought to you by MicroSeed, the smartest way to back up your seed phrase. All right, listen up, Bitcoiners. Your keys, your coins, but is your seed phrase truly safe? Introducing MicroSeed, the smartest way to store your 12 or 24 word seed phrase. Stamp your entire seed phrase on one tiny, indestructible washer. Titanium or stainless steel. Waterproof, fireproof, crush-proof. Small enough to hide anywhere. No guesswork, precise alignment, built to last forever. If your seed phrase is on a piece of paper, that seed phrase can get destroyed easily. With MicroSeed, you get an entire kit to stamp your seed phrase onto this washer. It comes with everything you need, from a hammer to the washers to the stamper. It's never been easier before. Take real self-custody and protect what matters. It's time to take control of your own seed phrase with MicroSeed. Use code TBB, as in the Bitcoin broadcast, TBB, for a discount. Go to microseed.io for the link. Go to the description below. All right, welcome to the Bitcoin broadcast. Today we've got on a special guest, Dennis Porter. Thanks for joining me, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great here in our nation's capital. Looking forward to continuing to fight for some great Bitcoin policy. Excited to be here with you, though.
Yeah, thanks, man. Like I said, I've read your article. I think it's awesome. I'm excited to talk about it. Hopefully people will actually kind of get on board with this. If you don't mind, though, I'm going to start by reading the first paragraph of your article that you wrote, because I think it's great. And I think it kind of sets the tone for what we're about to talk about. Because you're just like,
yeah.
What if one bill could secure America's energy grid, reduce methane emissions, rebuild domestic manufacturing, fix our supply chain dependency on China, and fund a strategic Bitcoin reserve, all without a single dollar of new federal spending? That bill now exists. It's called the Mind in America Act. So first of all, I love that, because I was like pumped to read the rest of it.
Yeah.
So this bill, you said it's like an infrastructure bill. It's an energy bill, a manufacturing bill, and a national security bill. So why don't we just start with like the infrastructure bill? What's in it that's in it for the infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things that I have been working on for many years, even before I launched Satoshi Action in June of 2022, is to better understand the potential opportunities from Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is probably one of the most misunderstood, misappreciated technologies that we have today that could help us do those things that that are at the top of the article. It can balance the grid, it can mitigate methane emissions, it can even help us build out electrical infrastructure, and it can help us solve some of the problems that are created by wind and solar. And then I'm happy to get into those. But it's a huge opportunity for our country to benefit from the technology. It is something that we have worked on for many years at Satoshi Action. So I started studying it before, and then I continued that work as Satoshi Action launched. And we ended up going around the country and passing legislation to make sure that people could continue to mine Bitcoin here in our country. But also we did a lot of research around the opportunities that Bitcoin mining has to offer. We ended up crafting over, I think, 12 to 15 roughly academic papers, and some of those papers even went on to be peer reviewed. Even one of them even made it into a top 2% journal. We had a really great guy, Dr. Murray Rudd, who was helping us during that time. And, it really helped to paint the the picture and create the intellectual firepower for these benefits that we were commonly going around and telling lawmakers exist. And the great part was also, or is, that not only is this, academic and theoretical on paper, but also we see real world examples of it taking place all across the world. Texas is probably the biggest example of the opportunity from Bitcoin mining when it comes to balancing the grid. There's two really important storms to keep in mind. You've got Winter Storm Uri and Winter Storm Elliott. They happened about 18 months apart from each other. The first one, Winter Storm Uri, comes in, pummel. This is a huge winter storm all across the entire country, but it was really incredibly strong, and particularly in Texas, where they don't they don't tend to have these huge winter storms very often, and so the grid isn't well prepared, well resourced for these very extreme, what used to be very rare events, although they're happening more and more as time goes on. But what happened was, storm comes down, pummels into the Texas grid, causes billions of dollars of damage, and over 700 people died during that winter storm. And interestingly enough, it was, I mean, seconds, minutes away from being one of the greatest electric infrastructure breakdowns in American history. They were very close. I mean, 700 people dying is pretty bad, but it almost was much, much, much worse than that. So what happens after Winter Storm Uri? Leadership at ERCOT, which is the people who manage the grid for Texas. It's a regional transmission organization. That's what ERCOT is. We have many of these types of regional transmission organizations, or they're also called independent system operators, all across the country. Almost not the entire country has one, but large portion of the country has these. And so these ERCOT, the folks that are running ERCOT, we see heads roll, we see them all get fired. They bring in new leadership because of this grave mistake. They bring in Brad Jones, who is the former CEO of New York ISO, which is sort of similar. It's the grid that covers all of New York. He comes in, he's looking for new and innovative ways to be able to manage the grid there in ERCOT, to be able to help improve reliability and to help make sure the grid is well resourced. Another important event occurs while he's having his tenure. China bans Bitcoin mining in their country, and a lot of these Bitcoin miners, sell big cell phones, own gold as they would call it. They banned the Bitcoin mining there in China. A lot of the miners are looking for a new home, and there's a significant amount of opportunity that they're seeing in Texas. A lot of Texans are pitching Bitcoin miners to go there and plug into the grid. And the reason why is because ERCOT has all these special programs and approaches to the way that they manage energy, including grid balancing programs like demand response, which is essentially, the good way to think about demand response is it's having a customer that is willing to shut off when the grid needs more power available. So instead of, in most cases, when you have a lack of supply of energy, when there isn't enough energy on the grid, you create more energy, right? You boot up more power plants. Well, sometimes, in even more recent years, particularly, we've seen the growth of what we call demand side management. So instead of just adding more supply, you come up with programs that encourage large load, even sometimes residential consumers, to shut off their power during certain times of the day or during certain types of moments when there's significant grid constraints. So a winter storm would be one of them, right? A winter storm comes in, all of a sudden everybody's turning on their heat, all of a sudden everybody wants to stay warm inside their homes, and nobody wants to shut their power off. And so it becomes this very grid constrained moment. Well, if you can find certain people that are willing to shut off during those moments, that could be incredibly impactful. And so the Bitcoin miners come in, they move in, they start plugging into these demand response programs. And then another winter storm hits, Winter Storm Elliott, almost exactly the same in a lot of ways, in force and function as Winter Storm Uri. But Winter Storm Elliott comes in, pummels the grid, but it's better resourced this time. In fact, just before the winter storm hit, they did a resource report, which kind of just says like, hey, what are all the power plants we have? What are all the batteries we have? What are all of the people that are willing to shut off when we need them? Who are they? Can we come up with a big report and figure out, who we can depend on? And in that winter's resource report, just before Winter Storm Elliott hit, there was a line in there talking about large flexible load, which is a new category that ERCOT had come up with, that the Texas grid operators had come up with pretty much specifically for Bitcoin miners. They called it large flexible load. Bitcoin miners are pretty much the only large flexible load, at least at the time, maybe even now moving forward. So winter storm hits, boom, and all the miners wind down during that storm. Some would say up to 1,700 megawatts of power wound down, which is, if you're not in the energy business, 1,700 megawatts of power is a huge amount of energy. That is enough energy to heat 1.7 million small homes.
Wow.
So right when everybody is trying to stay warm, right when everybody's trying to keep the power on, these Bitcoin miners acted as a first line of defense. Ultimately, there was a huge reduction in the amount of damage that was done during that winter storm, and nobody ended up dying. No, there were no reports of people dying. Now, there were other things that the grid operators did there between Uri and Elliott beyond just, depending on Bitcoin miners. There were new other approaches that they took, but it's not hard to imagine that Bitcoin miners played a pretty significant role, given that they all collectively, with real data that we can demonstrate that they did this, wound down and delivered that power, made that power available back to the grid in the middle of that emergency. I'll stop. I'll pause there because I went long on that one, but I think it's good to paint the picture on it because most people don't really understand the huge opportunity that Bitcoin mining has to offer. And that's not even getting into the methane mitigation component yet, or the potential to expand our clean energy portfolio.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's really, really important, especially because I think that should be completely bipartisan. Like both sides of this should agree on this. I mean, haven't they been pushing energy? They want the Green New Deal on one side, and we want oil on the other. Well, I think Bitcoin miners can help in both stances here, especially capturing flare gas and things like that. And so,
Mhm.
being bipartisan, I don't see why it shouldn't pass. But how does Bitcoin mining? One of the big things that is in your article is the manufacturing aspect of it, having it be made primarily by China. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's a really big, important piece.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, right now, in my opinion, China has a backdoor into our energy systems. This is because 97% of the hardware comes from Chinese companies.
For what?
97, 97% of the hardware for Bitcoin mining comes from predominantly two companies. And these are companies of Chinese origin. And normally, I don't, if I'm buying new headphones, I'm looking at things laying around here. If I'm gonna get a Diet Coke, like
Yeah.
I don't really care too much where it comes from, right? But when it comes to our grid, when it comes to the stability of our grid, and when it comes to the ability for us to be able to rely on its functionality, just from an individual, but also all the way up to like, critical infrastructure and energy systems around military complexes, like this is a national security concern. And within the energy space and the national security space, they commonly say that grid security is national security. You have to think about it from like, what's the doomsday scenario? We're in a really bad environment where maybe we're even like in an open conflict with China, and they're going to want to use every tool in the toolbox to come after us, just like anybody would when they're in the middle of open conflict. And so the very idea that there are roughly 10 to 15 gigawatts, some people say it's as high as 20 gigawatts of Bitcoin mining across the country. So that's enough power to heat 20 million small homes potentially. The fact that there is a potential avenue for our foreign adversary who is well resourced to be able to use these machines to have a negative impact on our grid is something that I believe is untenable for the United States. And it's a big reason why, you talked about being bipartisan. That's something that's incredibly important to Satoshi Action. We really believe in working with both sides of the aisle. We've been one of the only organizations in the country to be able to pass legislation in red and blue states that are pro Bitcoin, pro digital asset. So we've done this before. We're very engaged on these types of issues. And when it comes to the issue of the bipartisanship around Mind in America, it's not just some of the energy stuff. It's actually the China concern. The China concern is something that you spend any time in DC, and you'll find out real quick that there's a significant number of the members of the House and the Senate who spend a lot of their time. I mean, we have a select committee in the Senate on China, right? Like, and it's got Republicans and Democrats on it. We have people who are what you call China hawks who care a lot about pushing back on China on both sides of the aisle. So this is not something that is one-sided at all. And there are big concerns, especially from people in the Senate who can, get access to classified information, people that are on intelligence, people that are on armed services, these senators that are there or in the House as well. They can see what's really going on, and those are the types of folks that are seeing this legislation and going, yeah, I mean, I don't even really necessarily care about Bitcoin. I mean, some of them do for sure, but some of them are like, I don't even necessarily care about Bitcoin. But this idea that China has a backdoor into our systems is very troubling. And this is not totally theoretical because Bitcoin mining hardware that has come from China has had backdoors in it before. Back
Yeah.
in 2017, there was a you could call it a bug, you could call it a backdoor in some of the products called Antbleed, and essentially allowed them to control the device remotely. So this has happened before. We've also seen recently that DHS is investigating some of the companies from China, particularly stopping them at the border, the machines coming in, checking them for kill switches, checking them for backdoors. But my biggest fear is that uh, when you're thinking about the world that we live in today, with the advent of artificial intelligence and the speed and the pace at which people can break into systems and create exploits is far beyond what we've ever experienced before. I mean, it was bad before artificial intelligence, but now we are at this accelerated pace. I don't know if you saw that Anthropic recently said their Mythos new
Yeah.
model that they're about to release is like so dangerous and so sophisticated at finding exploits and being used as a tool to hack into systems that they could not release it to the public. They had to privately share it with a lot of different firms and say, hey, you guys need to start using this right now and start trying to solve these problems. We can't just give this out to the public. Like that's how, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but essentially that's how dangerous these types of tools can be. And in the wrong hands, they can be used to aggressively, hack into systems and create exploits that we don't wouldn't commonly be experiencing or seeing previous to AI. The big problem really is like sort of like nailing down on the equipment. And we get this question a lot. People are like, well, what about the chips? What about the inputs? What about all the little pieces that are going to that's not as much of a concern. The big concern is the firmware and the software. The firmware and the software on the devices controls how the device operates. And in the same breath, you can say that Bitcoin mining is really good for balancing the grid. The same thing that gives it that ability is this ability to turn on and off quickly. That same ability to turn it on and off quickly could be used in the opposite direction because it's all about timing when you're balancing the grid. How much energy and when are you deploying it? That's really important for how you balance the grid, whether it comes to supply and demand or another part of the grid, which is incredibly important called frequency. And frequency is like this, basically it's just the heartbeat of the grid. There's a certain rate at which the frequency is supposed to be set. It's 60 hertz here in the United States. It's 50 hertz in Europe. You have to maintain frequency like, like your life depends on it, quite literally, because if you lose the frequency of the grid, the entire grid will collapse. And you can't deviate from the 60 hertz by very much. You can do a little bit, but not by very much. And when I was going back to the Texas dynamic I was talking about before, where I said they were very, very close to like one of the worst electrical grid blowups in history, it was because they almost lost complete control of frequency. It was at like that last little bit where you're like, if we go any further, this whole thing is going to collapse and cause what you would call like a system-wide outage or a black start, which means everything is off. Nobody has power, and it can take days, weeks, months sometimes to repower the grid, which is an incredibly complex and expensive process. So, the miners in that case, they came in and said, hey, we'll turn off at the right time, the right amount of power to make the system work better. But a well-resourced adversary who wants to use those machines to do harm could do the opposite. They could turn the machines down off at the wrong time. They could overpower them at the wrong time and cause incredible problems for our electrical infrastructure, particularly around critical infrastructure and potentially military complexes. Yeah, I'll kind of pause on that because I think it's an important area to just like digest for folks. But there's a big concern around these machines coming from China. The firmware that controls the device could be used to manipulate, essentially our energy systems in a way that could cause huge amounts of damage, potentially even cause national security problems.
Yeah, and so one part of this bill was you would have to manufacture it in America, correct? And you'd have to get it certified as like an American miner, basically.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way the certification works is that if you decide to move away from Chinese hardware and you use, well, it's not Chinese specifically, it's foreign adversary, right? The Secretary of State maintains these lists of who's a foreign adversary. Anybody that's a foreign adversary, you move away from their hardware. Right now that's 97% of that is China, and you move over to US made hardware or allied made hardware. So the whole point is like, yes, we want to see more of it in the United States, and there's going to be additional incentives that people benefit from by operating in the United States. Predominantly, it's like we just need to break the supply chain where it's coming exclusively from a foreign adversary. So if you decide as a miner, you are the one mining the Bitcoin, you have the machines, and you say, I want to be moving over and be certified, you have to have a commitment to stop buying foreign adversary equipment year one. Year two, you drop your fleet 25%, then 50%, and then all of a sudden by year four, you're 100% on US or allied made hardware. And this also counts for artificial intelligence chips. So you can move from Bitcoin mining to artificial intelligence, which is something that we have seen take place all across the country. And in my opinion, as a Bitcoiner, I like this use case. I don't know if you've read Brandon Quittem's article, Bitcoin is a pioneer species, but I really view Bitcoin mining as a energy development tool. And there are going to be times when it develops the energy systems for our country and for the people of various states and jurisdictions, and then someone else comes in and uses it for a different purpose because they're willing to pay more. Maybe it's we build out new cities, new residential complexes. Maybe it's artificial intelligence, which we are seeing taking place already. Many of the largest publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies are going head over heels into the artificial intelligence space. So I view it. I don't think Bitcoiners should view people moving over as necessarily a bad thing. I think they should view it as a use case for how valuable this technology is, because now we are keeping pace and staying way ahead of our foreign adversaries on artificial intelligence development because of in a lot of ways, Bitcoin mining has played a role in developing the energy infrastructure that we ended up needing for that use case. So I like that. I love that. And that's what the certification allows for. It acknowledges that there is going to be other types of chips or other types of hardware that you can purchase, not just Bitcoin mining hardware. But once you're in the program, once you are certified as a Bitcoin miner, you join the program, you're in certification, you get access to various types of energy programs and USDA programs. DOE Title 17 is one good example. The way DOE Title 17 works is that if you are onboarding new innovative technologies, and if you're doing something, to put it simply, valuable for the grid, then you can get access to loan guarantees from DOE Title 17. And the way that operates is you still go out in the marketplace, you get a loan from a private company, private individual. And what happens is the government comes in with the DOE Title 17 and they guarantee the loan, which means like they're the backstop. If you don't pay, like they'll pay. That's really valuable when you're going to secure a loan, because whenever you're trying to get a loan, I'm sure you might be familiar with this. Many of your listeners might be familiar with trying to get a loan. It's going to be very difficult. But if you were to go find some billionaire to sign on, like they're going to be like, yeah, here you go. And here's the best rate. And here you go. Well, when the US government signs on, you get like the absolute best rate you could possibly hope for. So this is really valuable for miners who oftentimes have a difficult time raising capital unless they're in the public market, like the publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies. But not everybody has the ability to do that. Not everybody can, has the ability to go public or wants to be a public company. So that's a clear example of like why there's a lot of value here. If you're doing the good thing of moving away from Chinese-made hardware, foreign adversary equipment that's plugged into our grid, causing national security problems, you get access to these different types of DOE and USDA programs, which make your capital, raising capital, acquiring capital much more affordable.
Okay. Well, I love the aspect of bringing the manufacturing back to America anyway for it. And then I do want to touch on the SBR aspect of it, because I love that at the very end, how you kind of put in there, if you're manufacturing with the American parts and you can like sell it back, you can sell the Bitcoin back to the government, basically tax free, which is awesome. But first, so American Energy, we all know that, yeah, the power grids like in ERCOT and stuff are, and it's not just them, like it happens all over. I'm in Florida, like hurricanes happen here. I think we have FPL. And we waste so much energy here in America. It's a massive thing, and it's not only the flare gas, but like we can't transport it in time. They have nowhere to put the energy, so they either have to burn it off or it just kind of goes away. We just waste it. And so can you talk about how bringing in all these this Bitcoin mining aspect can help save that energy? I know you kind of touched on it at the beginning, but save that energy and be able to help our energy grid just a little bit more.
Yeah, and this is one of the most interesting things about Bitcoin mining is it's incredibly unique. I think it's important to compare Bitcoin mining really quickly before I answer your question. It's really important to compare Bitcoin mining to other types of data centers. The difference between Bitcoin mining and like an Amazon data center or even like an artificial intelligence data center is that all the Bitcoin miners all across the entire world are all doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. They are essentially giant, fast guessing number machines. Like they're very good at guessing a number very, very rapidly. That's all they do. Most people are like, oh, aren't they solving complex math problems? Well, yeah, theoretically, but they're really solving it just by guessing the answer as fast as they can. You know, they're guessing it 100 million times per second or more. So these are giant guessing machines that guess numbers super quick so they can find the next block for Bitcoin. Well, the unique thing about that is if you shut down large portions of Bitcoin mining throughout the day, you turn them on, you turn them off, like you're really not going to impact the ability for Bitcoin to function. Like, yeah, if you were to shut off like half the country's Bitcoin mining overnight or in a second, the blocks for Bitcoin would be reduced, by 50%. Like it would take twice as long for a transaction to process. But that's again, you're talking about the entire half of the world turning off its Bitcoin mining, and Bitcoin yet only suffers a deterioration in its ability to process transactions in an efficient and effective way. Not a hugely terrible thing. And again, you're talking about 50% of the world. Talk about turning 50% of Amazon's data centers off or 50% of Anthropic's data centers off. I mean, people will pull their hair out. Like the internet would fall apart. Your artificial intelligence tools wouldn't work because there's no ability for you to access them. At bare minimum, your cat videos aren't working, right? Like, but worst case scenario, like the hospital that relies on the ability for the internet to work isn't able to perform certain types of surgeries. So the data centers for Amazon, artificial intelligence going down is really bad for them. Bitcoin mining data centers don't really have that problem. They can be off, and in fact, they can be off for long periods of time. And so this unique ability for them to turn on and off and really sort of shape their demand of power to whatever they want is incredibly unique. And one of the unique ways that is really helpful is particularly around wind and solar. So wind and solar uh, are a type of power that are very different from a lot of other types of energy in that they don't have a fuel source. So there's no gas that goes into it. There's no coal. There's no water. There's no specific source of fuel. Um, of course, the sun is your source of fuel
Yeah.
theoretically, or the wind is your source of fuel, but there's no input. There's no specific input that runs out, and that's of course why they call it renewable, right? The other part is that's really important to keep in mind is they're not on demand power. So you can't like with coal or gas, like you can just put more coal or gas in, or you can stop putting coal or gas in whenever you want. It's on demand. Wind and solar are not on demand. They're only on when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. And I've yet to figure out if we can turn the sun on and off yet. I don't think that's going to
Yeah.
happen anytime soon. So what's unique then is that uh, wind and solar have this sort of non-on-demand power generation. Let's think about solar particularly for a second. Roughly around 7, 8 a.m. when the sun comes up, they're booting up, they're starting to generate more power. And that is very much like a bell curve. It goes up in the middle of the day. And at the middle of the day when the sun is hottest and the brightest, that's when solar is generating the most amount of power. And then, of course, you're going down the other side of that bell curve. And at the end of the day, 7, 8 p.m., whenever the sun goes down, that's when it stops generating power. Well, that creates really interesting problems for the grid because the grid is an on-demand system. It is specifically a supply and demand system. Whenever people want power is when the grid needs to provide that power, and if they don't, then the grid can have very significant problems that we talked about before. When the grid is out of sync, you need to have that supply and demand tied together all the time. If you have a mismatch, it causes serious problems. The other problem that it creates is that sometimes wind and solar create too much power and there's not enough buyers on the grid to buy it. And so they have to do this thing called curtailment. So instead of like most, gas, coal, they can just stop putting the fuel source in. Well, there's no way to turn the sun off. So instead of doing that, they shut off the solar plant. They shut off its ability to deliver power to the grid. But all of that energy it could have produced is what they sort of label as curtailed power, which means that it's wasted power, it's wasted green power, and that creates problems for the renewable energy generator because they're not getting paid. Sometimes it also creates a dynamic where we create subsidies because, well, we need these renewable energy assets. We want to build more of them, but we can't always they can't always rely on being paid for selling power. Sometimes, so we create these subsidies called like capacity markets, which essentially pay them for just existing. Like they don't even have to sell the power; they can just pay them for existing. So it does create another situation where sometimes we're subsidizing them, which somebody pays for a subsidy, and oftentimes that's the ratepayer. Well, the unique thing about Bitcoin mining, and this is where I'm going to bring it all together.
Okay.
The unique thing about Bitcoin mining is that ability to turn on or off whenever you want, which means that you can shape the amount of energy you're purchasing, shape your demand pattern is what they call it, you can shape that pattern to the exact pattern of solar. So you're booting up with solar, you're following it along the bell curve when it's peaking in the middle of the day when the sun is the brightest, and then you're turning it slowly off over time and gradually, not demanding any power anymore. This is an incredibly unique ability. There is no customer of power at scale that can do this. It doesn't exist. It has never existed. The only thing that sort of compares a little bit is batteries. Batteries can do this, but batteries aren't really a customer of power as much as they are a way to time shift when the energy is available. You think of them, they're absorbing the power and they're re-releasing the energy. They're not just consuming it and keeping it for them, and then it's sort of taking it off of the grid. So because of this, Bitcoin miners are incredibly powerful tool for solving these big problems in the renewable energy space. And when I say they're big, that's an understatement. If you look at California's grid, that one's called CAISO. If you
Yeah.
think back to the RTOs and the ISOs, that's called CAISO. They're one of the only grids that measures how much curtailment is taking place all throughout the year. They've been doing it for years and years and years. CAISO is currently on track to, by the year 2030, to curtail more power from wind and solar alone than the bottom 100 countries use on an annual basis. So it is a huge amount of energy that is being wasted, and that's just one state. Now, given California probably has one of the largest renewable energy portfolios in the entire country, but that's a solvable problem because of Bitcoin mining. To 100% solvable. All you need is policy, things like Mind in America. I think there needs to be additional local energy policy at the state level in California that helps to encourage Bitcoin miners to come in and monetize and use all of that wasted green energy. Like, why are we wasting this energy? We don't need to be wasting it. Like, if you go look at the chart, it's crazy. I've been watching this chart since 2022, and it just goes like this. It's up and to the right, all the wasted power. It goes up faster than Bitcoin, right? Like, it's this crazy chart that you look at. So when you talk about wasted power, just kind of going back to what you mentioned before, or energy that's being wasted, there's a huge opportunity for Bitcoin mining there. Wind and solar is the most obvious one because of that problem, the problem of not being an on-demand power source. They tend to have much more wasted power than on average than other types of energy resources. But yeah, and we should probably talk about the methane part next, but I'm happy to stop there for a second.
Well, yeah, I mean that's literally what I was going to ask next is I mean because methane is, one of the biggest things. It's one of the biggest complaints you see from cows and all that good stuff. Methane is, it's bad. But if we can use Bitcoin miners to come in and capture that, why would anyone be against that? And so, I mean, can you talk about the methane?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So methane is a combustible gas. This is important to keep in mind. It can be used as a fuel source. It is natural gas. It's the thing that comes out of your stove, right? Or the things that heat your hot water, that
Yeah.
is methane. That is natural gas. Um, we use it also for electrical generation, natural gas for natural gas power plants. Methane is sort of the environmental way to think about the way environmentalists talk about natural gas. And methane gas, it's more of its original term. I think they started calling it natural gas to give it a nicer name for when we started using it for mass power generation all across the country. But methane gas is 80 times more potent for warming than carbon dioxide. So if you care about the environmental side, if you care about the climate, that is a big concern. But it's not just that it is something that is 80 times more potent for warming than carbon dioxide. It's also a toxic gas. So it can create low level ozone. It's toxic for individuals, particularly young individuals. It can also cause groundwater contamination. So unlike carbon dioxide, which we breathe, which is totally fine, relatively safe, plants use it, right? There's no other downside from carbon dioxide for the most part, other than the concerns around the climate. But with methane, it's much broader. So reducing methane emissions is very, very good for the environment. And oftentimes what we do when we're trying to reduce those emissions is we burn it off. We just burn the methane, and we try to capture it and burn it. You see this at stranded oil and gas wells. So if someone is pulling oil out of the ground, there's this thing called associated gas, which is methane, which means anytime you're pulling oil out of the ground, a lot of times when you're doing that, there is natural gas, methane coming up out of that hole in the ground as well. And so instead of letting it just go out into the atmosphere, they set up such a giant pillar, and they capture the gas and they burn it at the top of the pillar. People have probably seen pictures of these a million times, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're in Texas, they're like literally everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's even though it's it's sort of a crude way to get rid of it, or a very basic way to get rid of the gas, at least you're converting it from methane into carbon dioxide. Because when you burn it, it converts to carbon dioxide. And so you would go from 80 times more potent to just the regular carbon dioxide side of things. Um, this is also true for landfills. Landfills typically follow the same process. The EPA has rules all around that approach. Same with um, oil and gas wells. Uh, with landfills, though, it's more of a sort of like renewable energy resource is how it's considered, because as a lot of the waste in the ground starts to break down over like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it just continuously produces this methane gas. And so a lot of times you'll see that folks have started to use this for power generation in a lot of different ways. The same is true for oil and gas. But the issue is, like, if you're in a stranded oil and gas well, or if you have a landfill in the middle of nowhere, you're really far, it's not really economically viable to build the generation that you need. So you use the gas, put it in a generator, and you create electricity. It's pretty simple. But if you're far away from anywhere that would buy the power, like, it doesn't make economical sense to build the power lines like super far away to some city center that's like 100 miles away just to sell this little bit of power that you would have generated. The other unique thing about Bitcoin mining, though, is that it can co-locate, which means you can place it next to anything. You want to place it next to the landfill, you want to place it next to the wind farm, the solar farm, you want to place it next to the oil and gas well that's remote, it's in the middle of nowhere. You can do that. And you don't need fiber, you don't need these like strong power, you don't need these strong internet connections to be able to run it. You need a decent one, maybe like a cell tower is enough. But the opportunity is that you can come in, you can place your Bitcoin mine right next to the landfill, capture all of that gas, put it through a generator, and use that electricity that you've generated from the methane gas to power your Bitcoin mine. And now you've just created an economically viable way to mitigate methane emissions, which didn't really exist unless, of course, again, one caveat: if you're really close to like a city, there's a landfill, you're super close to the city, you could generate power and you could send the power to the grid. But this is the first like on-site consumption of that power that you can do remotely pretty much anywhere in the world. It's an incredibly powerful tool for Bitcoin mining. And I think it's also why I think a lot of Democrats, or people that are on the progressive side of the aisle, people that care about the environment, are going to care about this type of legislation and the capacity for Bitcoin mining to solve these problems.
Yeah. Okay. So all of this sounds amazing, and I'm excited for it. Now, when something like this passes, how do we pay for it? I think that's a big concern because
Yeah.
people don't want to. I mean, obviously, like $39 trillion in debt. Like, how are we going to afford this, and how are we going to build this, infrastructure to do something like this? Where does the money come from?
So the money comes from pools of money that have already been established. The Title 17 was just refilled with $250 billion by the OBBBA, which I've started calling, someone said OB3, and I was like, oh, it's so much easier. BBA is the one big beautiful bill that, came out from the current administration. OB3, much easier to say. So OB3 refilled and renamed DOE Title 17, put $250 billion in there. So that's going back to the certification and going back to the pools of money that Bitcoin miners could potentially operate out of. That is the pool of money that they would now be granted access to. That they're not guaranteed to get it, by the way. They still have to go through the application process. They still have to win. They still have to win the reward of being able to use the funds. But that is where the money comes from. It's already appropriated funds. So that's why it's important when talking about the legislation, or the way that we're speaking about it, is it's no new federal spending. It doesn't mean there's no spending. There are buckets of money that have already been appropriated that Bitcoin miners can tap into if they're able to win those access to those types of grants and rewards through DOE Title 17, or USDA's REAP program is another one of the programs.
Okay. What are the qualifications, really quick, to be able to access that? Have you guys figured that out yet? Like, what qualifications for a Bitcoin miner to apply for these?
Yeah, so there's the biggest thing is, a lot of times for most of these programs, is you're doing something valuable for the grid or the energy systems. USDA's REAP program, for instance, would be a really good program for someone that's doing rural landfill Bitcoin mining. It's particularly focused around rural electrification and job creation. So those are some of the qualifications. We talked about DOE Title 17. If you're balancing the grid, and that the reason why that matters is because you're doing carbon avoidance or emissions avoidance. So when you're doing when you balance the grid as a Bitcoin miner through demand response, not only are you balancing the grid, you're also saving the grid money and helping it avoid the use of more carbon emitting types of fuel sources. The way that happens is because when the only other option, so you have two options when you're trying to balance the grid: supply or demand. The Bitcoin miner is the demand side. You are bringing your demand down so there is more power of it made available when the grid needs it. On the supply side, you have to boot up generation. Well, when you're in an emergency, in most cases, the only way to quickly boot up energy is through what's called a peaker plant. Peaker plants are essentially these gas power plants that um, you are what they sound like they are. They peak up, they boot up super fast. Oftentimes they're actually running on idle, and so they're always kind of like burning a little bit of fuel, and they're waiting for some type of signal from the grid, and then they ramp up really fast to be able to provide that power. Peaker plants are one of the most carbon intensive, one of the most expensive types of generation in the entire country because literally just wait and they wait and they wait till energy prices spike through the roof, and then they're selling power really fast like this. Um, that's why it's really valuable to have, instead of doing the supply side with the peaker plant, have the Bitcoin miner do it because you're reducing the amount of emissions that you're creating. You're actually also providing that resource or that power at a cheaper price. So the miner will get paid for demand response, a small amount, but it's nothing compared to what they'd have to pay the peaker plant. I mean, it's a huge inversion of the cost. So ultimately, you're also saving ratepayers money as well because whenever the grid is paying for something, those costs are distributed to whoever's buying the power. Peaker
Okay.
plant is much more expensive than demand response. Also avoids carbon emissions. So that's why DOE Title 17 says, well, you're doing all these great things. Like we want to see more of these positive behaviors take place on the grid. So we'll give you a loan guarantee. So that's a way to think about some of those programs and like what it takes to get to be able to participate in those programs.
Okay. And then I guess kind of the last thing is the SBR, which I think a lot of, Bitcoiners like
Yeah.
me would get excited about because, I mean, we were kind of promised that at the beginning of this administration and we haven't seen much besides, a couple seizing of more Bitcoin. Now we have like 200,000 Bitcoin and we haven't seen anything get passed yet to enhance this. And in this bill, I thought it was really cool. Can you kind of explain how this can help the SBR?
Yeah. So what this bill does is it codifies the Bitcoin reserve, the strategic Bitcoin reserve that was established through executive order. It also importantly codifies the digital asset reserve or digital asset stockpile, which was established through executive order. Now, and I know most Bitcoiners are probably thinking like, I don't care about a digital asset stockpile, but what it does that's really incredibly unique and I think valuable, and I think people will appreciate this, is that many of the assets within the digital asset stockpile, whether they be Ethereum, Solana, like, it doesn't really matter, but any of the stakeable assets, what the federal government can do is it can stake those assets and they can use that revenue to buy Bitcoin in a budget neutral way for the strategic Bitcoin reserve. That's what the legislation does. It says, okay, we have these crypto assets that are just sitting here doing nothing that could be productive because they can be staked. Let's stake them, generate some revenue while we're sitting on them, and use that revenue to buy Bitcoin. And that does it in a way where there's no new taxpayer funds used to buy the Bitcoin. In addition to that, also, Treasury has the ability, according to the legislation of the bill, if passed into law, they would be given the option to offer a capital gains exemption to any Bitcoin that they purchase, but it has to be a certified miner. So when you're going through the certification process, you're becoming a certified miner, beyond just getting access to these programs, there is the potential for Treasury to come in and say, hey, we want to buy some Bitcoin from you, and we're going to offer you a capital gains exemption. This just gives Treasury, puts in a better negotiating position, but also gives those Bitcoin miners an additional incentive to be part of the program as well.
Yeah, that's the part where I was like, that's really cool because then, it incentivizes them to buy and get certified. And so now they're purchasing from American manufacturing. We
Mhm.
know they're not buying foreign adversary parts. And so there shouldn't be any spyware in it because it's, made in America. And now we're selling it. They get to benefit because they're selling it for cheaper to the government and they don't have to pay the capital gains tax. And so I was like, that's just like a perfect little full circle moment right there. And so I was like, that's amazing. And then I guess, so who's putting this bill forward and what are the next steps to get this passed?
So Senator Cassidy's office is the lead on this legislation. They've been doing a ton of work on it, and we're just honored to be able to participate in the process. Senator Lummis is the co-lead on the legislation, which was great to get her, stamp of approval, her endorsement of it. And now, in order to get it passed, the next big step is we need to get a Democratic co-sponsor. So if, if you want to get a bill through the Senate, you got to have 60 votes. Um, Republicans don't have a 60 vote threshold, so you naturally need some Democrats on board, which means from the very beginning, as you work on legislation, if you aren't going through that process by adding Democratic voices in and Democratic senators in, once you get to the actual floor vote where you need 60 votes, like, you're not going to get it. So, like, you got to start early and often working with the other side of the aisle. And the same would be true if Democrats were in power. I mean, it's been a long time since anyone's had a 60 vote threshold in the Senate. So if you want to get your legislation to move, you got to find somebody in the minority to cross over and join you. And the sooner you can do that, the better. If you're waiting till the last second, your U.S. senators, they don't want to be dog walked by the other party, so to speak, right? They want to participate in the final product and the outcome. They want to have their fingerprints on it. They want to be able to help improve it. There's a lot of pride of ownership in the Senate. So if you're saying, you get to the final vote and it's a Republican bill and it's all Republicans and only Republicans were the ones having any input, and then you turn around, you're like, hey, we need some Democrats to join in. They're going to be like, well, you didn't ask for our help at all during the process. So would we sign onto your bill when you don't have any bipartisan support to start with? So super important. And I think pretty much like any bill that doesn't have Democratic support, or at least some type of Democratic co-sponsor, or any let's take like the identities out of it. Let's take the party name labels out of it. But anybody in the minority, you have to have somebody from the minority as part of the process. We saw this with the Genius Act. We are seeing this play out with market structure. Now we know it's been difficult to get it across the finish line, but there is concerted effort by both sides to get it across the finish line. And so if you don't have that, you're sort of, you're shot. Your project is done for. It's never, it was finished before it even got started. So that is key for us. If we as Americans want to see this legislation pass, we have to get Democratic support of the legislation and have them come in and be a co-sponsor. And that is something that we are spending a lot of our time advocating for and working on.
Awesome. And first of all, sorry for that noise if you could hear that. They haven't been mowing outside all day, and now they decided to mow right outside my window. So that's the noise if you could hear that.
Only briefly. It was like for a second, and I barely even heard it. So I think
I was
it'll be
like, dude,
fine.
it's been raining all day, and now they decided to mow. I was like, perfect. So
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah, that's right.
well, I really hope that you guys get this passed. I mean, because this is like the most pro crypto slash Bitcoin, Congress president we've ever had, and so I'm really hoping that you guys can push this through the finish line, because that would definitely put us at least in the right step. It would give us a little bit more hope for Bitcoin, and not only help the environment, help the infrastructure, help the energy grid. So. Is there anything else you wanted to add about this bill that I didn't ask?
I think we covered all of the most important parts. But if people are really interested in learning more about the legislation, we have a page on our website at Satoshi Action. We're making improvements to it all the time. But if you go to satoshiaction.io and it's under our policy section, you'll see right at the top there's a Mind in America part where they can dive into some of the details about the legislation in just a little bit easier way to digest it. I think reading legislative text or reading that large article sometimes can make it difficult. So people can go there. Of course, we always ask people, if you are interested in the work that we do, you like the work that we do, please consider supporting our work. We are a nonprofit. Everything that we do is possible because of the support of individuals, and we're by far and away vastly supported by individuals as an organization, which I think makes us oftentimes much more different than some of our peers in the space, and it allows us to pursue our mission and vision of making the United States the best place in the world for Bitcoin. And so, yeah, if you really love what we're doing, please do consider supporting us. All Vegas, I'm going to be speaking there, so excited for that panel. And hopefully we can talk about Mind in America a little bit more there as well. And I really appreciate you having me on. I mean, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll put the links to everything that you just said down below. Thank you guys for watching this, and make sure to like this video, give it a little thumbs up, share it with someone that you think would enjoy it as well. And I appreciate you, Dennis. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.